Okay. Hi, my name is Grant Mansfield, and I am the 8th priest to serve here at St. George's Episcopal Church in Maplewood, New Jersey. I'm also the 3rd priest who is openly gay to serve in this parish. Now I want you to take in a scene. Imagine you're at a worship service one morning and you're coming up to receive communion. And as you're kneeling to receive Holy Eucharist, all of a sudden you see a microphone thrust into the face of the clergy person in front of you and a news reporter asking probing questions. That's a scene that happened here at St. George's in the 1990s. And the story that led up to it is so instrumental in understanding queer history in the Episcopal Church and how that changed the national conversation within the church and in broader society around LGBTQ inclusion and affirmation. It involves an openly gay man and his committed partner becoming ordained here in this very sanctuary. It involves a bishop being brought up on heresy charges in the second heresy trial ever to take place in the history of the Episcopal Church. And it involves a quaint, tiny little church in the town of Maplewood, who, for all intents and purposes, were not seeking national news, national coverage, to be in the spotlight, but just sought to be the loving example of Christ in the world. This is their story of how they lived out the gospel and how it changed queer history forever.
I'm Ulysses Dietz, and I'm a longtime parishioner here. I started here in 1986, but my husband and I, who was then in 1980 was my boyfriend, we moved here 40 years ago to try out to be daring and brave and moving to the suburbs. Fairly early in our time in Maplewood, we started coming to a group that met in this room called the Organization for Gay Awareness, which is such a funny 1970s sounding name. Remember that? Well, that's how we met you, was through that.
At some point, and I don't recall when, we started to go to attend Dignity meetings. Dignity was a gay Catholic organization.
And happened to meet here.
Right, they met here.
Yeah.
We were involved with the Catholic Church through Dignity, being Eucharistic ministers. Bill, because he is much more observant, he would actually sit in the pews with his rosary beads, and they would be clanking as he was kneeling, saying them like all the Italian women were in the cathedral in Newark. But in any event, only because he then became more involved in Dignity and wound up becoming the president of the Dignity chapter here. So of course that brought him into contact with Craig Burlington, who was a rector. As it happened, Craig contacted Bill about some issue, but he did it the day after the Catholic Church in New York came out against the gay rights bill in New York City. And Bill was livid. And he unleashed his anger about the Roman Catholic Church onto Craig. And Craig said, well, Bill, you know that you and Michael are invited to St. George's and would be welcomed at any time as a couple. And the two of them continued their phone conversation. Several days later, we received in the mail a handwritten invitation from Craig that said, you are welcome, and he underlined as a couple, and provided the upcoming Easter season services that started with Palm Sunday. Well, being the good Catholics we are, we went to an 8 o'clock Catholic service before coming here, but...
That was real church.
It was the natural course of events.
But I think you also have to remember the other history of that is we had been exceedingly supportive of the renegade women who were being ordained.
Oh, yes.
And then there was a regular group that were ordained not long after that, and Paige Bigelow's mother was one of them.
Yes.
Right.
She was legit, right?
She was legit, right? And we were very supportive of that. Then we got Jack Spong to come.
So that was early in his bishopric that he came.
Brand new. We got him immediately. He was a superb teacher.
And a radical thinker.
Radical.
And he's the one who fixed it in my mind. If I had had any lingering, I work in the design industry. So many of my friends are gay. And Spong preaching one morning said, think of Jesus dying in agony on the cross, saying, come unto me, all ye who are heavily laden, except you who are blue-eyed, left-handed, gay, or lesbian. And I thought, boy, that's the answer. That's all we needed.
So
Jack Spong knew about this church and knew about us, which is why we got involved in Oasis. It really was because once we were here, we were the most openly gay people in any church in the diocese. So the Oasis was specifically a ministry to the lesbian and gay community, and the format was that every Wednesday at some church somewhere in the diocese there was an Oasis service hosted for people in those congregations and in the community who didn't feel comfortable going to church otherwise. And it's sort of hard to fathom that was a really necessary thing. And usually the churches there were churches who would not host Oasis, but the churches I went to, and including the cathedral downtown, there was always a good small congregation of people who didn't really have parishes.
Of course, I knew about St. George's before I was ordained because I was a colleague of Craig Burlington.
Yeah.
And I knew that even at that time, when Craig was still rector there, that he had this phrase that, for instance, I think it was when I don't know which group it was, wanted to meet in the parish hall, sort of a group was it Dignity or
Oasis?
And his famous remark to the vestry was, look, are we going to be Christians or aren't we?
Wow.
Yeah. And so he really set a tone there that just very quietly, consistently, sort of underground way, began to open the congregation up.
And I don't know if it was in the context of you guys or if it was just in the moment that Craig really felt he needed to talk to this group, because having this group meet in this church was a first, certainly in the diocese and maybe in the community, in any church, of having a gay group meet in the church.
And reading the Star Ledger one morning, Craig Burlington from this church called St. George's in Maplewood was quoted as saying, I don't remember his exact words, but it was a clear communication that at our parish, gay and lesbian people are more than welcome. And this was at a time of controversy within the Diocese of Newark. And so he wanted to make sure that it was known. And I just closed the newspaper and I said, Cheryl, we have someplace to go next Sunday.
So here, 3 gay men come walking into church. What was the reaction?
I don't think.
Here's a bulletin. Find a place where you're
think there was
comfortable.
a real an overt problem.
Yeah. Oh no.
So in 1991, Craig Burlington stepped down, and then we had a 2-year search, and we found Barry Stoff.
And Ann Reed was our interim, and she was a woman, and she was very funny, which was delightful.
Actually, Craig had just left. It was the interim's first week here, and her name was Ann Reed. And Ann goes to consecrate the Eucharist, and Sharon leans over and says, can she do that? Because she was a woman. And I said, apparently.
So there weren't very many women that were celebrating the Mass.
No.
Right.
So that also felt like
Amazing.
a welcoming place
It
for
felt,
women.
yes and no. To me, it just felt shocking, and I was just so stunned. I couldn't concentrate on much else than believing that there is actually a woman who's also a priest.
I was just
Yeah.
floored. I had never seen a woman celebrate ever.
Wow.
It was just so overwhelming.
I had an interview, of course. I was still at Church of the Atonement in Tenafly,
Yeah.
And my partner at that time, Will Leckie, and I were like, this is never going to happen. This is impossible. The word on the street at the time was that those of us who were gay or lesbian who were in the process or who were ordained were sort of in the inner city, and that was sort of Jack Spong's attitude as well. It was like you'll go where people are desperate.
Right.
So the call to St. George's was a sort of a watershed moment in that regard too. Was that this suburban parish that had quietly been Christian and welcoming and on the path, called this gay rector the partner.
No, we did lose a few congregants who picked up their skirts and went elsewhere.
But no more than 3.
I don't think so.
It felt very affirming, really.
Yeah,
You
it
know?
was still another shocker. You know,
Yeah, shocker.
first you're going to put a woman on the altar. Now you're going to give me a gay priest. What?
How much better can it get? What is it,
Honey, you're not in Rome anymore.
And so one Sunday in particular, everybody up there with me was queer. So Michael Francavilla had the ushers and someone else was scheduling other people, and it just happened that way. And so a person in the vestry who was heterosexual after the service said, I noticed everybody up front this morning was either gay or lesbian, and you might want to be concerned about that. And the first little conflict I had was after I responded, why weren't you worrying about that before we were here? It was only straight people. Well, there were gay and lesbian people in the congregation. Why weren't you encouraging their ministries?
When you were ordained at St. George's,
Mm-hmm.
how many other openly queer or lesbian, gay or lesbian rectors were there in New Jersey that you were aware of?
A dozen, perhaps.
A dozen.
Yeah. We were all in sort of a version of being out. And it was really that eventually the conversation in the Episcopal Church generally about its losing its moral value that began to highlight me at St. George's.
So Barry Stoffels being called as rector to this church was the first time an openly gay priest ordained, knowing that he was gay, with a partner at the time, had been made the rector of a mainstream Episcopal church in this diocese and maybe in the country. And Barry's ordination earlier was the first time an acknowledged gay man with a male partner had been ordained.
I was furious at first. Let's put it that way. I was, after the call that Walter made to me and said, look, here's what's happening. I just thought the institution, yet again, is going to decide who's worthy and who is not, and they're going to do it on the backs of Walter Ryder and queers. And even though the people in power in the institution were saying, listen, you, Barry and the rest of you queers should not take this personally. This is about doctrine and order and da-da-da-da. That's what the institution always says when it's trying to submerge someone in cement shoes.
Yeah.
That was just the language. So at first I was really, and Will, of course, was like, okay, time to bail. I'm not going to go through this with you. I love you. I love St. George's, but we've been too out for too long and helped too many people already to be sacrificed by an institution. Because at that point, we didn't know how St. George's would respond. Really.
Right.
I mean, this was going to test them in ways that they never imagined they would have been tested by calling a gay rector.
I remember being appalled that the Episcopal Church was going to do something as stupid as try a nice little bishop for heresy. Didn't make any sense at all.
Only the second time in the history of the church.
So I think what really happened here was this congregation just sort of rallied to his support.
Bishop Ryder being presented for what was essentially heresy made me feel as part of the group that regards our rectors as our leader. I feel like a mama bear. Like, you don't mess with my priest. You don't mess with our rector. We chose him, we love him, we need him, and what he stands for, and the person who ordains him in particular, what Walter Ryder stands for, is justice and dignity for all human beings.
To quote the New York Times, our response was that he is simply our priest, a smart and soothing man who happens to be gay. And then came the press, and they came, and every Sunday there would be journalists in our pews, and we all looked to see where they were and if they were taking notes.
And I was on the other side of the communion rail. And one of these reporters came up and tried to get over the rail, and I had to push him back. So I think we felt quite invaded.
We were told to be on alert for anybody who might be angry or upset about the trial.
It was
basically.
weird. I couldn't
And
believe this is happening.
at the same time, we had, on the same day, we had major news outlets here in the church
Right,
recording the services and getting footage of Barry celebrating.
right.
They wouldn't disrupt the services, but they'd be sitting in the back with cameras taking notes as if something exciting would happen, like a
And
gay
they were-
priest was going to do.
And they were doing interviews in the sacristy.
Yeah.
Right.
And I just got tired of them being there.
But nobody that you
And
know of.
that's sort of what it was, is we just got sick of them being
just
around
mean,
because there was nothing going on.
all the
and we were
lights
just
and
living our
cameras.
lives.
Right.
It
Disruptive.
was disruptive.
We'd show up to Sunday church and there would be newspaper reporters in the back
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
waiting to see what happened. Of course, nothing happened except an hour and a half long service, which was a little shorter because Barry wasn't really raised an Episcopalian, so he would like simplify the services a little bit. And that probably caused more problems than the fact that he was gay.
It was complicated and exhausting and thrilling and terrifying, all of it at the same time. And I'll tell you a little story. We were sitting at the trial in Wilmington, and Will and I were sitting behind Walter and Nancy. And the guy's last name is a Reverend Fairfield. I don't remember his first name, but he was the dissenting opinion. So he was reading his dissenting opinion, which was just full of all of this crazy doctrine and vitriol about the queers. And Nancy Ryder turned around to me and said, "I'm so sorry you have to suffer this abuse." And it was the first time that I began to deal with the fact that the institutional had absolutely been an abusive father to its queer priests and lesbian priests. That this was not just a metaphor,
Right.
that it was doing what institutions can often do, especially the church,
Right.
which is glorify suffering and suggest that their priests put up with that suffering in the name of Jesus, rather than reforming the institution itself.
Right.
And it was at that moment when the crack first started in my relationship with Will. It clarified so much for him. And I think at that point, to be honest, I would, if he had said to me, "I can't do this any longer. As a gay man in a relationship with you, I cannot take this abuse any longer," I probably would have left the church.
Wow.
He didn't say that, thank God. But even so, the fabric of that, split, the fabric of between us was starting to fray at that point.
Because it just felt like nonsense. This felt like a kangaroo court. We did see that this was like the beginning of something schismatic happening in the Episcopal Church, and that did play out, has played out over the last 2 decades.
The verdict came down and it was a positive one. It was certainly a joyous relief and a celebration. But there's a part of, for many of us, that felt, well, we kind of figured this was going to happen. I wasn't all that afraid that it wouldn't because of it was an unexplained feeling of faith. It may not have had any logic behind it, but it was just part of me that I knew it.
It was kind of, so that's all there is to that. It seemed a foregone conclusion, but it was obviously dicey along the way and very nerve-wracking. Very nerve-wracking for all of us. Because, we loved Barry and hated to see him go through such agony. For what? For what?
And it wasn't fair, it wasn't right, it was really stupid on the part of the Episcopal Church. And they were doing it,
The result of this trial was that there was no longer a canonical prohibition to the ordination of gay and lesbian clergy. And that's what Spong was fighting for, as was Walter Ryder, as was everyone else in the church.
Well, Barry left in '99, and there was a long hiatus of a bunch of interims. So then we finally got Bernie. The search committee selected Bernie Poppy, our second gay rector, but again, the reaction, well, actually, the best part of the reaction from the church that I thought was he had a beautiful voice, and he sang the Eucharist that first day, and you could feel the church relax.
It's true. I remember that, yeah.
Was he concerned?
But by the time we brought Bernie in, it was like, it really was not a big deal.
But we didn't call a gay priest. We called a priest who happens to be gay.
Thank you.
Yes, and that's one of the things that I loved about Bernie, was when Bernie would say, I don't do gay weddings.
Right. I do weddings.
I do weddings for people who were gay.
Right.
And the same thing, that it just is right. We called a priest who happens to be gay.
Right.
And Bernie would serve St. George's until 2017. It's a long, stable period in which we gained strength and grew.
How many different services have you had?
3 here. We've had 3. So we had the service of Holy Covenant, and then we did the civil union ceremony here, and we had an official wedding ceremony here.
Right. And the week prior to our wedding, we're just sitting over there in the pew. The Sunday school came out, as they always do during the peace, and the whole church school was lined up, all these children, and they unrolled a whole long butcher paper filled with all of their signatures and well wishes, and it said, Happy Wedding, Sharon and Cheryl.
Yes.
And it was like taped up on the wall for the whole week and for our wedding. It was just so moving and so unexpected.
We were the first official legal
wedding in the history of the church here.
Barry Stoffel just posted this on Pentecost, is that he baptized our daughter on Pentecost 25 years ago. And with Ann Bowles Bevins and her father and her husband and their little boy, William. And so there are great photographs of all of us up there. And that was huge to me.
It did change Maplewood.
Huge.
We began
Huge.
to attract many more gay couples. And the town has benefited. The church has been a growth engine.
And I would also add, we attracted all kinds of different people who had integrity. Not just gay, but a whole bunch of different kind of people. Because they wanted to come to a place where that was the aim.
We asked Bernie, he did a wonderful job. And I mentioned before, I was impressed because Jack Spong showed up for our wedding.
What year was that?
2016.
Okay.
I gave Bill for Christmas the marriage certificate from town. I said, okay, we'll do this for... So we asked Bernie to lunch because I wanted to talk to Bernie about doing it in between services, the way that Sharon and Cheryl did it. I wanted something low-key. I wanted to, just wanted to do it. Okay? And Bernie said, no, we're going to do it I want to do it as a full service. He never had the opportunity to incorporate a marriage into a service, and he said, no, this is how you're going to.
Yeah.
So that's how we did it. He said, don't worry about it. Well, I reached out to people like Craig Burlington and Bishop Spong, and Bernie preached and brought Jack Spong to tears because he honored Jack Spong with the fact that we were here because of him.
Well, I think there's something that St. George's continues to be good at, and I think it's really important, and that is not to be afraid of the world people bring into church every Sunday. It's not anything to fear. It's an invitation for discovery of the goodness of people. As I always say, it's that simple, almost trite phrase of, is this person making the world a better place as a result of being in the Episcopal Church and at St. George's? And if they are, why is their trans nature, for instance, available for judgment? Because I'm gonna take my chance on Jesus, not on politics or government or culture war. What people say about me is none of my business. My eye needs to be on the path that I've chosen. We can't be afraid of looking at ourselves over and over again and search ourselves and say, where are we missing the mark with regard to how the world's changing?